We are on 78b, bottom of the page. Boy of Papa, 3 lines from the bottom of the, three lines to the bottom of the page. Are we together? Are we together? Can you hear me?
Doing fine so far. 78b, bottom of the page.
Perfect. Okay. I'm just I'm in a hotel lobby, so I'm not talking so loud. It's hard for me to judge how loud I'm talking. If at any point you can't hear me, just interrupt me. Unmute yourself and interrupt, and I'll try to raise my voice a little bit. Boy of Papa, bottom of the page. Gonfon Kita Umachra. It's an interesting scenario. So this is sort of a continuation of our discussion. Yes, you can't even remember a time. This would be Friday morning by phone. We're discussing about an animal. So in order to slaughter or sell, you have to sell the entire animal and slaughter the entire animal. Now, obviously, in the case of slaughter, that's pretty likely. It's not likely; it's necessary. Obviously, when you slaughter the entire animal. What happens the question was if a guy steals an animal and he sells only parts of it? So we discussed different parts of the animal. We discussed what happens if you leave behind. You say, "I'm selling I, the thief. I'm selling the animal." Give me a second here. Give me a second. So let's say you leave behind with 3 different options. You can sell the animal, except that the robber keeps for himself the wool or the horns, or let's say the lower half of the hand. An animal's hand, in Talmudical terms, the hand is the front legs of the animal, or a life critical organ like the heart, the trachea, the esophagus, something like that. And we had a few different opinions, really 4 different opinions, discussing what could be left or can't be left over. We discussed that all yesterday. Today we discuss interesting scenario. Gonva Kita, he stole an animal that was an amputee, so it was missing a leg. Umachra, and he sold the animal. Mahu, what's the story? Mi amrina, do we say, Mai de Gonav Halei Zoven? 1 second. One second. Hold on a second. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry. He didn't steal an amputee. Pushing some buttons here. Okay. He stole it. Hold on a second. So he stole an animal, he amputated the leg, and then he sold the animal as an amputated animal. So we say, my digona of Holizovin, he stole this animal, and then he sold an animal that was missing a little bit. There was something missing. So the mechira is not a complete mechira. Or do we say, or do we say, look, in terms of the sale, he sold the entire animal. And because there's nothing left over in his sale, the sale should be valid, sufficient that he should be liable for $1 v'hei, 4 and 5. So Gemara says, Teiko, let it stand. Toner Rabbanon, Ganav v'nosan la'acher, v'tovach. Okay, so he stole it, he gave it to somebody else, v'tovach, and then that other person slaughtered it. 1 second. Yeah, so he basically slaughtered the animal through an agent. Or Ganav v'nosan la'acher mocher, he sent an agent to sell it. Or Ganav v'hikdash, he stole it, he sanctified it, and we'll soon explain. We saw this already on Thursday. We explained that sanctifying an animal was in some ways selling it to the temple fund. The Gemara discussed the consensus opinion seems to be that it does not constitute a mechira such that you'd be liable for $1 v'hei. And the reason for that is because ultimately speaking, the animal is still called by the original owner's name. As we say that this animal is still the ox of the original owner, or the thief for that matter. In other words, sanctifying it doesn't sell it to hektish because it still has the owner's name attached to it. Okay, now This Gemara disagrees. This Gemara says sanctifying an animal is the equivalent of selling it to Hektish, and therefore you would be liable for Dalad Behe. Gone of a Hikif. He sold the animal, but the payment wasn't given. So this is like the what's called can't remember the name of the program. It's like a pay later program. A firm is the modern version. Basically, you buy the item, but you're taking it on credit and you pay back later. So that's what he did. He sold it to somebody. The guy didn't give cash on delivery. He said, okay, we'll pay it over the next couple of months. Okay, Ganav v'hichlaf. He stole it, the hichlaf, and instead of selling it, he bartered it. He traded it for a horse, let's say. Ganav v'nasan matana. He stole it and he gave it as a gift. Ganav upara chayvai. He stole it and he paid up his debt. So the thief owed money. So what did he do? He robbed somebody else, stole the ox, and he used it to pay his debt. 1 second. No. Okay, or ganav upara behekefai. Okay, so this is a similar version. Basically, he stole the animal. He had purchased from his friend. I don't know. He purchased from a house, and this was the payment for that house. This was the cash that he's giving to his friend. That's also called a sale. So even though in this sense it's the reverse of a sale, right? A typical sale, I'm selling you the item, you give me the cash. In this case, it's the opposite. He's buying an item, and this is his payment. All these or ganav v'shalach savlainis beis chamav. Okay, this is sort of a very odd scenario, but he stole it and he gave the stolen animal, as a gift to his fiancée, beis chamav, to his in-laws. All these examples you pay 4 and 5. Mike Mashmalon, what's the chiddush? These seems to be obvious. The Gemara says, Ashmin and Reisha, ganav v'nasan la'achar v'tabach, yesh lechet baravera. The first two scenarios where he stole it, appointed a messenger, and the messenger slaughtered it, or the messenger sold it. Okay. Afagav the B'kala Torah Kula ain't shliach v'varavera, even though the consensus opinion is not like Beis Shammai, it's like Beis Hillel that says ain't shliach v'varavera. You cannot appoint a messenger to sin on your behalf. In other words, if I do appoint a messenger to sin on my behalf, the sin is not connected with me, and the messenger is responsible for the sin. That's the typical rule. However, this is an exception, like we spoke about this previously in Bava Kamma and in other mesechtas. With regard to the laws of selling 4 and 5, we do say that you can be a messenger, you can appoint a messenger, and the messenger's actions qualify as your own sin. As the thief's sin is done by the messenger, which is a unique exception. My time, what's the reason? Because the Torah says, you slaughter it or you sell it. Just like selling the animal must be done through somebody else. So if you slaughter the animal, in other words, in order to sell, it requires a counterparty. You can't sell it to yourself. Therefore, that tells me that if counterparties could be involved in the sin, they could be appointed as agents as well. So too, selling also can be done by an appointed messenger. And the Achar Mechayev, you'd be liable for Dalad Behe. But Ashmin and Seifa, and there's another chiddush also in this brayso, Ganav v'hikdish, sanctifying an animal. Mali machol lahedid, mali machol l'shamayim. That we view the sanctification of the animal as the same as selling it to a private citizen. It makes no difference whether you sell it to a private citizen or whether you sell it to heaven. In both scenarios, you are liable for Dalad Behe. And again, like we pointed out before, this was not the consensus opinion. This is a minority opinion, and that's the opinion the Gemara is following right now. Okay. We continue. We're on the Mishnah 79a. Gonav b'rshus habaylim, v'tovach u'machar chutz m'rshusam. Gonav b'rshus habaylim. Okay, so now we get into a practical question, which is you stole the animal from the domain of the robber, and this is a question of go back to the subject called kinyanim, acquiring things. So Gonav b'rshus habaylim, we stole it from the. So let's give a name here. So the owner, let's say, is Ruvain, and we'll call the thief Binyamin. So Binyamin steals it from Ruvain's house. So he takes it out of Ruvain's house, he brings it into his own house, and in his own house, he either slaughters it or he sells it. Or alternatively, he sold. So the cow the ox was not in Reuven's house, it was in Zvulun's house, or maybe it was in a forest. And he stole it from the forest, and one second. It's interesting. So he stole it from the forest. He brings it into Reuven's house. Again, Reuven's the owner, but he's stealing. He's a robber. And what does he do? He slaughters it or sells it inside of Reuven's house. Or he stole it from the forest and he sold it or slaughtered it in the forest. In all these cases, you pay 4 and 5. And this seems to be obvious. As you might have all expected, this is perfectly regular. The Chiddush of the Mishnah is now, if I steal it from Reuven's house and I sell it or slaughter it in Reuven's house and I never take it out of his house, I keep it in his house or his property, his field, corral makes no difference. Potter, I'm exempt from Dalad Hey, we'll have to explain. Okay. Potter. Here's the beginning of the explanation. So the guy was pulling the animal, and he pulls the animal out of the owner's house. Sorry, he's pulling the animal to take it out of the owner's house. So he's in Reuven's house, and he's schlepping the animal. The animal's giving him a hard time, and the animal drops dead. It's done. Because he never removed it from Reuven's house, therefore, Potter he is exempt. Meaning the thief here is exempt from the dead animal. Why? The explanation here is because he never removed it. He never really stole it. Because in order to steal it, you have to remove it from his property. Just because you trespassed and did something to his property against his will, doesn't constitute stealing unless you actually engage in removing it from his property. In this case, he never did that. He was just pulling it to leave, but he never, he hasn't taken over responsibility until he acquires it. Why did the animal drop dead? Presumably, it was not because he was schlepping the animal. I don't know, maybe the animal was old, maybe he had a heart attack or an aneurysm, I have no clue. But it doesn't seem, this is not a case of mazik. It's very important to understand. He didn't damage the animal. It wasn't like he was whipping the animal so abnormally that it would be understandable the animal dropped dead. It's not what happened. The animal dropped dead from what appears to be natural or normal causes. Okay. One second. Okay, and therefore, Potter he's exempt because he never acquired the animal. We're on 79a. We're at the Mishnah, and have been halfway through the Mishnah. One second. Okay, Higbiu. Let's say it was a small animal. He lifted up the animal. So it was a sheep or something. He started carrying the sheep. 1 second. Or he moved the animal just outside the house, outside the front door, into the public property. Then now he's responsible. He's the thief. Thief is responsible. If it dies even from natural causes, he's liable. Yeah, I would say natural causes here probably is not old age, because if it was old age, then the value of the animal is fairly minimal in the first place. So, right, what's an animal that's going to die in 2 months worth? I don't know. It's not worth that much. So the damage would be fairly minimal. It's probably an animal that died from natural causes, but otherwise would have looked like it was worth more. Although technically it probably could have been old age, just the payment would be smaller. Okay, so this Gemara is not so clear. I'm going to go here with the second version of Rashi, and we'll have to explain in the Gemara with some more detail. So the robber has a firstborn son. You might be wondering about the appropriateness of somebody who just had a child being engaged in such robbery. But not only that, he also is his firstborn. He's not a kohen. His wife is not a Levi either. He's not a Levi, and he redeems his firstborn son with the stolen animal, or he pays back a debt, or he gives the animal to a shemerchinam, to a shayal, to neisei sachar u'l'seicher. Shemerchinam is an unpaid watchman. Shayal is a borrower. Neisei sachar is a paid watchman. U'l'seicher is a renter. So he hands it over to the watchman, or he hands it over to his creditor. So it's like a massive chutzpah, right? So he goes into Reuven's house, takes the animal, he calls the kohen up, he tells him to meet him in Reuven's house, and he gives the kohen the animal to redeem his firstborn son. Now, typically, you're probably thinking you're supposed to give 5 silver coins, and you're right, you aren't supposed to give 5 silver coins, but the kohen can say that anything is worth 5 silver coins. I'll tell you a funny story. My Rosh Yeshiva was the firstborn, he was kohen, and he's very machmer. He liked doing mitzvahs like many times over, just to be sure he fulfilled the mitzvah. So whenever he meets a kohen that is miyuches, in other words, that has his family tree dating, proving that he comes from Aaron HaKohen, and he's never met a kohen from that family, he redeems himself again. So he met a kohen once, so he took off his hat, and he says, "Is this worth to you 5 coins?" So the guy said, "Yeah." I think I mentioned the story in the past. I think actually Bava Kamma also. It was in Kedushin, actually. So the guy said, "Yeah." So he took the hat. So Yeshiva gave him his hat. So the guy doesn't need the Yeshiva's hat. So he gave back the Yeshiva. Anyway, there was a very wealthy man sitting there. It was actually in his house. So he's also a firstborn. He says, "You know what? Let me also redeem myself." So he took a silver cup off the shelf, a nice becher, and he says, "Is this worth you 5 coins?" He says, "Yeah." So he gave it to the kohen, and sure enough, the kohen kept it. Right, silver cup, you can use it. It's helpful. The guy was expecting to get it back like the Yeshiva's hat, but it didn't quite work out that way. Anyway, so again, this guy's a huge mechutzah, tremendous chutzpah. He gets the kohen into the house that he's stealing from. He gives the kohen the guy's cow, right? Or he gets his creditor, brings him into the house, and gives the stolen cow to his creditor. Or he has a watchman to watch the cow he's about to steal. Okay, so if the animal dies so the kohen is walking out with his cow, and the cow drops dead, potter, he's exempt. Who's exempt? We'll have to explain. At least for the robber and the kohen, it's that the robber is exempt. Higbiu, let's say the kohen picks up the cow, not the cow, he couldn't pick up a cow, he picks up the sheep, or he removed it from the domain of the owner, then chayev, he's liable. Meaning the robber will be liable now in 4 and 5. A Maimer has the following question. Okay, so let's explain this. We will get to it, I believe, in Bava Kamma. For sure we'll get to it in Bava Metzia, and it comes again in Bava Basra. Very, very important concept. So this has to do with kinyanim. You acquire something. How do you acquire something? We'll go with the consensus. It's machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. We'll go here with the consensus opinion. It's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. In general, it was accepted that money would complete any transaction. But then there was a problem. It was so what would happen? I would go into the granary and I'd buy, 100 pounds of wheat. It's very heavy. Probably want to do it in 2-3 trips. So I take 20. I pay cash. Take 20 pounds with me and go home. Now what happens? The granary burns to the ground and all my 80 pounds is burnt. If that's the case, then because I pay for it, I should take a loss. And the owner of the granary is going to put my items last in line for his rescue operation, as might be understood, because why would he save my stuff if he can save his stuff first? In order to prevent that from happening, the rabbi said, money does not acquire. You must do mashicha. You must either move it or you can lift it up. And the reason is because once you're moving all 100 pounds, you probably have a forklift operator take it straight to your truck and drive off with it. You're not just going to leave it there. Okay, so now the question is, does this rule also apply to the rule of watchman? Does a watchman, in order for him to be a watchman, does he need to do mashicha or not? Do we say that he's not considered a watchman until he receives the item? If it's a cow, he pulls it. If it's a couple of chairs or something, maybe he lifts it up, maybe he moves it. Either one. Is that critical or not? So the Gemara says, Toshma, let's look at our mission. Okay, all these scenarios. The robber hands over the animal to a shomer, to a watchman. So the shomer, the watchman, is pulling the animal, and the animal drops dead in the original owner in Reuven's house. Potter, you're exempt. Who's exempt? My love, shomer. The watchman is exempt for failing to do his job and watching me correctly. And our mission, because our mission is saying that the watchman is exempt. In other words, the watchman is exempt from paying back to the thief. Clearly, and obviously, the thief would have to. At this point, the thief wouldn't either have to pay back to to the original owner because it's in the original owner's property. Remember, you see from our Mishnah very clearly that Meshicha, the kinyan of moving, is required for Shomrim as well. So Amarle, the students respond. So Rav Yemer, Amemar responds to Rav Yemer responds to Amemar. It says Amarle loy, not necessarily Ganav. It's the robber. The robber's exempt. So the Gemara says Hatana Leration. We already know the robber's exempt. That was the first part of the Mishnah. The Gemara says Hatana Ganav Shiganav Beis Mailam, Hatana Ganav Shiganav Mi Beis Shomer. In other words, the scenario here is not where he got the watchman to come into the owner's property, but that he stole from a watchman's house. So it's two scenarios. He stole it from either the owner's house, Reuven, or if Reuven asked Shimon to watch his ox, he stole it from Shimon's house. Either scenario works. Okay. 1 second. Okay. Rav Ashi responds, he says, don't try to give our Mishnah that the two scenarios. One scenario where he stole from Reuven's house, another scenario when he stole from Shimon the watchman's house. Don't give that scenario. What difference would it make? It must be Shomer. We're talking about where the robber handed it over to the watchman in Reuven's house, in the original owner's house. And of course, yes, it is a good proof. In order for a Shomer to accept responsibility, he needs to either pick up the item or move it. Itmar Nami, we have another brayso that supports this. Amar Belazar says, just like we have Mashicha that works with buyers. In other words, like we explained, like the guy who has the granary, because we don't want the owner of the granary to exempt himself by to save. Just like by the granary, we want the owner of the granary to save all the wheat in the granary, no matter who it belongs to. So we change the law and we say, basically, cash is not enough. You can always change your mind after giving cash. You have to actually move it. So too, the same rules applies to Shomer. You're only a watchman once you move or lift the item. Oh, and one more thing. Just like karka, property, is acquired bekesef b'shtar b'chazaka, is for the first Mishnah in Masechtas Kedushin, you can acquire property either through kesef, money. So unlike metaltlin, unlike the oats and the wheat in the granary, where we said you have to move it or lift it, no, when it comes to property, kesef, money works. Obviously, property can't be lifted up anyway, or moved for that matter. So kesef works, money works. Shtar is a document. The document would be even if there isn't any money necessarily attached to it now, or could be money's being handed over later. Chazaka is doing an action of living in the property. There's a few ways to do this. The modern way to do this is typically to change the locks. That's a good example of chazaka. Another way is to walk the perimeter. Another way is to actually live in it. That also works. All those acquire a house. Schiros, if you're renting, you have the same kinyanim. So Gemara says, well, schiros demai. What exactly are you renting? Are you going to what's it called, rent a center, and you're taking out you're renting a forklift or a generator, or maybe you're renting a house. If we're talking about a metaltlin, meaning you're in a rent a center and you're renting a camera or a generator or something like that. So with regards to metaltlin, movable items, can you write a document on them? No, you can't. Movable items are not acquired with documents. It's what we saw in Kedushin, Daf Vav. So Rav Chisda says, Schiros de karka. We're talking about renting property. Renting property has the same laws as buying property. Okay, now we're on top of Ayin Tesam days, 79b, third line. Amar Belazar, Ra'u shehitmin b'charshin, tabach u'machar. The owner sent his ox to a forest. He hid in a forest. So what did the guy do? The robber went to the forest. He stole it and he slaughtered or sold it. He pays 4 or 5. So the says, he never did Mashicha. He hid it and it moved. Hold on a second. They saw him hitting it with a stick. He stole it in a forest, a public area. Everyone saw him. That he's not a ganav, he's a gazlan. Remember, a ganav is a nighttime thief. A gazlan is a daytime thief. If he's stealing it by day, then he's a goslin. If he's a goslin, then there's no dollar v'hei. 1 second. The Gemara says, "Kivin the kametamri mitmer minayu ganafu." Okay, the Gemara says, no. This guy, even though it's true that he was he was in a public area, but he was doing this very quietly, very hidden. That makes him a ganav. Vel gazlan hechidami. What is a gazlan? The Gemara explains. Amar Ravu says, "Kigayin ben Yob ben Yehudah." What's a gazlan? Like ben Yob ben Yehudah. What's the story? He walked up to an Egyptian. He grabbed his spear and he cut his head off with his own spear, with the Egyptian spear. In other words, obviously the Egyptians saw him coming, and this is obviously wartime, and he had his fully within his rights to kill him. So he stole the guy's spear and killed him with his own spear. Meaning, this is like with all the chutzpah in the world, a mugger in English. Okay, another example, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, like the people of Shem. Shenemar is the verse states. These Balei Shem, these were highwaymen. So it was well known that if you went on this highway, the people at the top of the hill, they were going to take care of you, and they did. They took care of everyone who walked by. So the Gemara says, "My time on the Amar Mehai." So the Gemara says, "Rabbavu, why didn't he give an example of the highwaymen?" So Amarloch, even the Metamri Tmuri Loigas Lonino. So Ravu says, no. These highwaymen, even though it's true that everybody knows, you walk on the highway at the top of the hill, this is what's going to happen to you. But at the end of the day, they're when you get to the top of the hill, you don't see the thieves waiting at their booth. You walk down the road, and at some point, you feel a muzzle in the back of your neck. But these people are hidden until that point. They're not sitting there at a checkpoint. Welcome to Mugger Station. It doesn't work that way. So they hide and then they attack you. And however, Rabbi Yochanan, who did come? 1 second. Rabbi Yochanan says, because everybody knows that at the top of the hill of this highway, you're going to get robbed. That's sufficient to be called a gazlan. The fact that they hide and they attack you suddenly is because they don't want you to be able to escape. But it's not because these are gazlan. They're going right in your face and they're taking your stuff. Okay, now we get to few interesting Gemaras, and some of this we mentioned in the past. There were some other reasons we haven't mentioned. Let's explain it. The students of Rabbi Yochanan Zaka. If everyone remembers from Pirkei Avos, the students of Rabbi Yochanan Zaka are legendary for being very involved with their Rebbe and having all these interesting conversations. It's, I believe, the second parak of Pirkei Avos, right? What's the good way that a person should choose? What's the bad way a person should choose? It's five different opinions. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan Zaka is walking with his legendary students. And they ask him, they say, this is a very obvious question. Why is it that the guy who sneaks up from you and pickpockets you, he has to pay kefil, and the guy who just walks up to you, knocks you to the floor, and takes your wallet, he does not have to pay kefil? And the same thing is true of Dalad V'Hei. The guy who he distracts you, by asking, his friend asks you for directions and he makes off with your ox, he has to pay Dalad V'Hei if he slaughters it. The guy who walks up to you and just grabs your ox, mounts it, and walks away from you and throws you a punch, he's exempt from Dalad V'Hei. Well, why? What's the difference? Amar Lahem, so Rabbi Yochanan Zaka says, Zehish v'kavod eved l'kavod kainei, v'zeh loihish v'kavod eved l'kavod kainei. The guy who steals hidden, the pickpocket, so he's embarrassed not from God, not from men. However, the gazlan, the mugger, I'm sorry. The guy who mugs you, he's not embarrassed. In other words, he doesn't care what you think of him. He's going to mug you in daylight. He doesn't care what God thinks, because obviously God doesn't want you to steal. However, the guy who comes hidden, he is afraid of what you think of him. That's why he's pickpocketing you. But he doesn't care what God thinks. That's why he's stealing. He doesn't. The robber does not equate people with God. He's more afraid of people than he's afraid of God. He makes the eye of God as if it doesn't see. And the ear of God as if he doesn't hear it. The people that hide from Hashem, hiding their plans, they do their actions in darkness. The verse says, the Yomi, they say God doesn't know, God is not going to hear us. These are the same people that say God has sort of abandoned the world. They don't care about God. They do care about people, though. That's why they're stealing in private. That's why it's much worse to steal in private than to mug a guy straight. Okay. Omer Meir says, Moshli Moshel, I'll give you a moshel, a parable. What's this comparable? Two people that were in a city. Mishta. They made it. One guy made a big party. They both made a big party. Okay, what happened? One guy, he invites the entire city except for all the dignitaries. They are not invited. One guy didn't invite anybody. So, which is worse? The guy who makes a private party and doesn't invite anybody? Okay, people are, okay, fine. But the guy who invites the common folk but doesn't invite the king folk, that's much worse. If you're making a party, let the king folk come too. The prince class, the nobility. The guy who invited the commoners but didn't invite the nobility, he is far worse. He expresses disdain toward nobility, but wants he wants the camaraderie from the common folk, and that's exactly what a pickpocket does. He wants people to think of him as a regular, normal guy, one of them. But but in terms of the nobility, in terms of God, he doesn't care what God thinks, and that's why he has to pay kafir. Amar Meir says, okay, now we get to the difference between Dalal and Hay. How much do you pay for a sheep? 4. How much do you pay for an ox? 5. Why? Amar Meir says, Meir, come and see, how important work is. Right? Which animal does more work, an ox or a sheep? Obviously, it's the ox. The ox that you stop from working chamisha, you have to pay 5. However, the sheep doesn't work, are bought, it's only 4. Rabbi Dovid says, he gives a different reason. Let's look at the how much the Torah values the importance of being covered abrius, dignity for the community. Okay, let's explain. Why is this? The shore of the ox that you were able to hold and pull out by holding it by the halter, so then you have to pay 5. The sheep that you stole, which he presumably carried on his shoulder, so there's less dignity in that type of behavior. The Torah says because you've embarrassed yourself, you only have to pay 4. Okay, and this type of minor embarrassment is such the Torah says it's worth giving a lower payment. That's how valuable the Torah considers it. Okay. Next mission. Okay, so let's explain this. One should not raise a behemoth. What is behemoth? I don't know the English. I think there's an English term for it. I'm not 100% sure what was the article called. Translate behemoth. Daka literally
domesticated animal.
Small domesticated. Okay, they're both domesticated. A behemoth is domesticated. Daka is a small animal. A gas is a big animal. So what's a daka? Practically speaking, a daka is typically sheep or goats. You're not allowed to raise those animals in Israel. Why? Because these animals tend to graze everywhere. We'll also see the exceptions. We'll get to it in a minute. This is not everything. We're not there yet. But as a general rule, you cannot raise these small domesticated animals in Israel because by raising the animals, necessarily you'll be stealing from other people's property because they'll graze in other people's fields. However, you are allowed to raise them in Syria, Midbar Shel Eretz Yisrael, or the deserts of Israel. Those areas that are set for public pasture, that are your animals can graze there without stealing from other people. You do not raise chickens in Jerusalem because of kodshim, because of sacrifices. Well, again, we'll explain the detail. What about the fact you have to bring them? We'll get to it. We'll explain the details soon. Okay, why mnei kodshim? Because these birds, they eat a lot of garbage, and as you might imagine, in the garbage is probably a lot of tummy foods, and these animals might bring them into the house and make things tummy. So we say no birds in Jerusalem, none of these chickens. But like Kohanim are tzomim at the Haras, and Kohanim that eat truma all over Israel, they should not own these chickens either. Again, we'll get to the specifics shortly. A Jew should not be in the business of raising pigs. A person should not raise a dog unless it's tied with a chain. The reason for this is because they bite and they bark, and this is a Talmudical concept. I don't know how it pertains today, but apparently in Talmudical times, the vicious bark of a dog could cause a miscarriage. So therefore, a Jew cannot raise a dog unless it's tied to the post. Ein person we do not place traps for the doves unless they're away from the settlement areas, at least 30 risks. 30 risks is roughly equivalent today to about 1.2 miles, maybe a little bit longer, a little further. So it's between 1.2 and 1.5 miles. Tana Rabbanon, we're at the Gemara, bottom of Ayin Testament Bays, 79b. Tana Rabbanon. Last medium line. Tana Rabbanon, Ein megadol behema daka b'Eretz Yisrael. One cannot raise a behema daka, a small domesticated animal in Israel, av megadlan b'chorshin sheberetz Yisrael. But we can raise them in the forests, Ubesuria and in Syria. I feel b'yishav even in the settled areas. And certainly outside of Israel. Tanya idach, Ein megadol behema daka b'Eretz Yisrael, av megadlan b'midbar shebeYehudah or midbar shebesfar Akoi. One can raise these animals in the midbar of Judea, and also the midbar that's in the area of Akko, at the border. Akko is one of the borders of Israel. However, we do allow you to raise large animals, and the reason is because it's impossible to restrict it. Large animals were the cars of yore, right? You can't restrict it. People need them to work, and therefore we allowed people to raise large animals anywhere. 1 second. Behema daka, a small animal, efshel hav mechutz la'aretz, you can bring it from outside of Israel. Behema gasi, efshel hav mechutz la'aretz, large animals are necessary to have as farm animals, as workhorses, and therefore the rabbis had to allow people to have them. Even though one is not allowed to raise these animals, but he's allowed to keep it up to 30 days before the holidays. As you might expect, the holidays, people used to buy a lot of sheep. Once Pesach is coming up, Pesach, everybody has to buy a sheep. Plus, besides for the carbon Pesach, he also brought we call a Shalmei Chagiga, and then possibly a whole bunch of other ones. You might bring an oilas, you have to bring at least one oilas riyah, which might be a sheep, and then possibly many more. You might bring multiple Shalmei Chagigas, you might bring multiple, maybe a Shalmei Taida also. You might bring a lot more sacrifices. So the rabbi said once 30 days before the holiday, then the rule no longer applies. Everyone's allowed to have these animals. And similarly, if his son is getting married, he's having a party, also 30 days. Okay. However, there's one condition. It's not there's a 30-day window that you're always allowed to keep the animals for 30 days. It's 30 days to the event. Once the event happens, you should not have the animals. You should slaughter them. Besides the Chamina, I would think Inafik Regal Umechizav Na'ahash Akante Loim Bo Tilson Yemen, Loinema Tilson Mishashar Lishui. Akim Nafale Regal Loim Bo Lishui. Okay, so let's say the Gemara is saying is like this. Let's say a guy is preparing for the holiday. So he knows he needs to buy 15 sheep. He's not going to buy them 15 at once. So 30 days before the holiday, he buys 5. 10 days later, he buys another 5. 10 days later, he buys another 10. And then 5 days later, he buys the remainder. He shouldn't say, well, look, the first animals have 30 days. I'm going to slaughter those animals first. All the remainder that I bought 5 days before the holiday, you know what? I'm not using them the holiday. I can keep them for another 15 days after the holiday because I have an extra 30-day window. No, it's not how it works. Once the event comes, or the wedding comes for that matter, that's the time all the animals should be slaughtered or get rid of them. Okay. And we are on top now of Peyam and Aleph, 80a. First word of the line, if you're a butcher, if you're in the butcher business, then you have a 30-day window. So you buy an animal, you have 30 days to slaughter it. And that's a constant cycle. So you can always a 30-day window. It's not like there's no event. You're a butcher. So then whenever each animal should be held for no more than 30 days. Okay, 1 second. 904. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. We're gonna get to a little bit long. Yeah, we'll continue a couple more minutes. About 10 more minutes to finish soon. Okay, Shalom Talmud from Gamliel. The students asked from Gamliel, Mahu Legado, or what is the story with raising these animals? 1 second. So he said you said you can raise it. You're allowed to raise these small animals. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? What about the Mishnah? This was the question. Are you allowed to hold them hold the animals even if you're not raising them? You're allowed to hold them. You're allowed to hold the animals. However, you cannot set them out to pasture. Like if you tie them to the bedpost, then you'll be allowed to own them for a longer term. You can't raise them, but once you have it, you can hold it for a year. Just keep it inside your house. Tana Rabbanon is a story. With one chassid. A chassid is somebody who does more than he's obligated to do. These are extremely righteous people, and with these people, God is extremely strict with them. And we'll see. He had a murmur in his heart. He had a what do they call it? Myocardial infraction. I was having a heart attack. But he asked the doctor, where they said, the only solution is he has to drink boiling milk every single morning. So what they do, they brought him a goat and they tied it to his bedpost. And every morning they'd milk the goat and they boil the water and they boil the milk and he'd drink it and it's supposed to get better. But one day his friends came to visit him. As soon as they saw the goat tied to his bed, again, remember, he needed this for his illness. They turned around. They said, listen, there's an armed robber in this guy's house. We're going to go visit him. And they said the only sin he had was that he had this A's, because at his level of being a chassid, he was so righteous that he should not have had the A's. He should not have had to go tied to his bed. He should have gone out every day to buy milk and boil that milk. He should not have had it. He should not have kept a small animal around his house. And presumably the reason is because people can learn from him, and they might not recognize the law, and they can come to raising such animals in Israel. Vafu, and this righteous man, at the time he died, Amr, he says, it's a pretty powerful thing to say. I certainly can't say that. I have no other sin except for the sin of that goat. Pretty powerful. Because I did not listen to what my friends told me. Amr Rabbi Shmuel said, my father was the Balabatim. He was among the laity of the Upper Galil. Why were they all destroyed? They would raise these animals, these small animals, and they'd pasture them in forests. And even though technically speaking that is permitted, I presume, one second. Yeah, what's that? The Don and Din Imam is biyachid, and they would judge monetary matters with only a single judge, which is also not permitted. You require three. Three are required. Even though there were forests next to their houses, and the forests, remember, you're allowed to raise animals in the forests of Israel, these small animals. However, there was a small field in between them and the forest, and they'd have to cross that small field every day. And because that small field was privately owned and presumably their animal stole, that is why they effectively violated the laws of the rabbis and stole, and therefore they were destroyed. The rabbis taught, let's say you have a shepherd who violates the law of the rabbis. The rabbis say no small animals in Israel. He violates the law and he allows small animals. So what happens to him? When he does tshuva, he wants to repent. One second. We don't require him to sell his entire animal in all his whole herd in 30 days, because obviously it's going to be a lot for his financial loss. You tell him, you can sell it in small quantities. Similarly, you have a convert. His father he raised pigs and dogs. He can sell it in small chunks. He doesn't have to sell it right away. If somebody makes a vow to marry a woman or buy a house in Israel, we do not require him to buy a house or find a woman immediately until he finds either a house or a woman that's appropriate for him. Because there's a story with a woman. Evidently, she was probably a widower or divorcee, and she had a son, and the son it was very hard for her to raise a son alone. She's a single parent. So she promised that she's going to get married as soon as possible. And as soon as word got out of her promise, you can imagine the kafta, she was immediately, a bunch of suitors presented themselves. Finished ball, and she's, I'm sorry, I'm missing the story. The kafta finished ball, she went ahead because she saw how difficult it was to be a single parent. Finished ball, she promised, she said, whoever, when the first suitor comes, she's going to marry him. So what happened? So a bunch of potential mates showed up, and none of these were a good fit. So she went to the rabbi. She said, "What do I do? I promised to get married at the first possible, the first possible person, but none of these people are marriage material." So she went to the rabbi. So the rabbi said, "No. A promise to get married as soon as possible means to an appropriate mate." Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue from there tomorrow.